Hello, and welcome to our webinar on laws, policies, and caring for students with chronic health conditions. My name is Betty Sue Hinkson, and I'm the State School Nurse Consultant with the Utah Department of Health and Human Services. And joining me is Kendra Muir, who is the School Nursing and Wellness Specialist at the Utah State Board of Education.
Thank you, Betty Sue. Yes, today we're going to be discussing laws, policies, and also board rules. I just wanted to make clear that neither Betty Sue or myself is an attorney, so we cannot give legal advice. If you have any content questions, then you should contact your legal counsel for either your school or your district. So today we're going to be talking about medication laws, what that entails for students to use medication during school hours or school activities. Also the Nurse Practice Act and rules, the required vision screening that is within schools, required immunizations, the Head Injury Act, and then also the health and safety rule, period products, and seizure awareness. It's important that staff is aware of these laws and rules because they're also required by law to be within the limits and follow the law. So first off, we're going to be speaking about medication laws. So the administration of medication to students is one law. It's a general law for medication that requires students who need to use medication at school to have a signed authorized form that's submitted annually, signed by the parent and the healthcare provider. We also have administration of glucagon, which is an emergency medication for diabetes, and that allows training of all school employees who volunteer to administer glucagon in an emergency situation where a student might have diabetes. Also, the administration of seizure rescue medication, diabetes medication to maintain their glucose levels, and Opioid Overdose Response Act, which allows agencies such as schools to carry and administer Narcan. We also have the emergency response for life-threatening conditions, that allows any students with anaphylaxis to carry their epinephrine, and also for students with asthma to carry an asthma inhaler for use in an emergency. So the Nurse Practice Act and rules sort of helps nurses. This is what nurses need to follow in order to practice within their nursing license. So the school nurse must delegate any procedures that includes medication administration to be performed by school staff that is not licensed to do so. This does not include all nursing functions, so they cannot all be delegated to staff. What determines that is after the nurse does an assessment of the student and the situation, the nurse must determine if delegation is appropriate and can be safely done. So if it cannot be safely delegated, the task or the nursing procedure, then other reasonable accommodations must be made for that student. So if activity can be delegated, then there must be an individualized healthcare plan in place before it happens. So there's required documents, and Betty Sue is going to be discussing those further. I just wanted to note that the documents that we share during this presentation today may look a little bit different than the ones you use at your schools. However, the documents that you use are required to have the same elements. So that's what she will be discussing when she speaks next. So the individualized healthcare plan, we hear that term a lot, and it has different meanings depending on who's saying it. But the actual individualized healthcare plan is a plan written by the nurse for the nurse. And the nurse uses input from the family for this. So this plan is not needed to be shared with staff at the school, but some nurses may choose to share that. However, the emergency action plan that we're going to be discussing is written by the nurse and family, and that is for school staff to follow in an emergency situation. Normally, they'll have training before that occurs. Medication authorization, that's a form that has to be signed so that by the parent, guardian, and the healthcare provider, so that the student can carry that medication. And it has to be submitted to the school annually. So an updated form is required each year. In some cases, other documents are required to provide care, and they also need to be signed by the healthcare provider and submitted to the school annually.
So let's talk about a few chronic health conditions now. We're going to go over we're going to start with diabetes, and I've got snippets from the Diabetes Emergency Action Plan, or EAP. The parts you're seeing here are related to hypoglycemia, which is low blood glucose, and hyperglycemia, which is high blood glucose. And you can see we've got some symptoms that should be marked specific to that student. And then over on the right side would be, the actions below would be what you would do for those symptoms of mild or moderate. And if you're in the severe, there are different symptoms that the student might exhibit. And below that would be the actions on what you would need to do for a student having a severe hypoglycemic reaction. Below, it follows the same format. So hyperglycemia being a high blood glucose, it shows on the left the mild or moderate symptoms that are student specific, and below that the actions, and then the severe hyperglycemia next to that would be student specific, and the actions you would need to take for that particular student. It's important to become familiar with the signs and symptoms of both the low and the high blood glucose. Specific to that student, it's a good idea to have a general understanding of general symptoms, but it's even more important to know exactly what the student in your classroom might show for their lows and their highs. Never send a student with diabetes who is exhibiting any of these symptoms alone anywhere. Don't send them to the office alone. Don't send them to the bathroom alone. Always make sure somebody is with them. It doesn't have to be an adult. It can be a responsible student. But especially with a student who's having a hypoglycemic reaction, that is extremely dangerous, and a student could collapse in the hall and they could potentially die. And so it's important that they don't walk down there or go into the bathroom alone, because nobody would be there to run for help. So make sure they never go anywhere alone when they've got symptoms. Students with diabetes are likely to miss more school than a typical student. They need to see their diabetes doctor about every 3 months. They may also need to see some specialists because diabetes affects so many different body systems. It can affect your vision, it can affect kidneys, it can affect lots of different things. And so that leads up to more doctor appointments. And so we need to be more flexible on our attendance on students with diabetes in particular. Blood glucose needs to be checked periodically throughout the day on anybody that has diabetes. The most common times would be before they eat anything, before meals, but they may also need to test their blood glucose before recess or PE, taking a test, or maybe even before they go home for the day, just to make sure that their blood glucose range is in a safe range, so that they don't have a problem while they're participating in any of those activities. Some students may wear multiple devices, like an insulin pump or a continuous glucose monitoring system. And these are really terrific technology devices, but they do come with a few problems, and some of those include alarms. Each of those have an alarm. If there's anything wrong with the pump, it might alarm. If there's anything wrong with the CGM, or the continuous glucose monitoring system, it will alarm. And those alarms cannot be ignored. Those need to be responded to in a timely manner. Next, let's talk about allergies and anaphylaxis. So here's a clip from the Allergy and Anaphylaxis Emergency Action Plan. And this is set up a little different, but similarly to the diabetes one. This one shows the symptoms on the left, and then your actions on the right, separated for mild to moderate reactions, and then for severe reactions. So in order to best meet the needs of our students with allergies and all the other students in the class, It's important that we not promise a nut-free, that's the most common one, or an allergen-free class or school. We cannot restrict what other students bring into the school. If all they'll eat is a peanut butter sandwich, we cannot restrict that. So what we can do is be allergy aware. So if you do have a student with, for example, a peanut allergy, you may have to have a separate table where any students with allergens sit and eat, and restrict any other students from sitting there. If they happen to have a peanut butter sandwich, they can't sit at that table. Some allergies are so severe, a separate table may not be far enough. They may need to be in a separate room where they can eat in order to stay safe and not be exposed to the allergen. All schools are required by law to stock at least one epinephrine auto injector. Most common brand name of that is an EpiPen, for use on anyone who's experiencing symptoms. It could be for a student with an undiagnosed allergy. It could be for staff members with an undiagnosed allergy. It could be with any visitors to the school who might need that. That does not mean that students with known allergies don't need to bring their epinephrine auto injector. They still do, because it would be horrible if you had two students that had a reaction on the same day and your school only had one EpiPen. So it's still really important for all students with a known diagnosed allergy or anaphylaxis to bring their epinephrine, their own personal device, to the school. Of course, that would require the medication authorization, or actually on this form, it's combined. So this form has the place for the signature of both the parent and the provider, to allow for that student to have their EpiPen or epinephrine auto device at school. It's important that staff understands that a student that has a severe allergy can die at school if they're not treated. So you cannot take it lightly if a student comes in with any of these severe symptoms that are shown over on the graphic. Do not delay. Don't try to give an antihistamine like Benadryl instead of the epinephrine. You need, for a severe reaction, Benadryl will not save that student's life. Only epinephrine will save that student's life. So it's important that you know where the device is and how to administer it, especially if you have a student in your classroom. The student and the parent and the provider will likely list where they would like to have this device kept, the student-specific device. It might be in the main office. It might be the teacher might have it. The student might carry it, which is allowed if it's indicated on their emergency action plan. And the last thing to remember about this is if epinephrine is ever administered, you must always call 911. It's not a one and done shot. In many cases, a student will need more than one shot, and in about 10 minutes, their allergy might get worse again. So immediately, whenever you give epinephrine, you must call 911 so they can be there to evaluate the student. Here is our asthma action plan, which is the asthma emergency action plan. We have this divided down into 3 areas of symptoms and actions. Green, if you're showing those symptoms, they're good to go. Yellow, mild or moderate. They may need a rescue inhaler. And then red, severe. They may need, beyond the rescue inhaler, they may need you to call EMS, and that would be all student specific on their asthma action plan. It's important that we take any student complaining of breathing difficulties, take them seriously. Even if they don't know they have asthma, if they haven't been diagnosed with it, it doesn't matter. Anybody with breathing difficulties needs to be taken seriously. If they don't have a rescue inhaler at school, you might need to call EMS just to come and treat them. If they have an inhaler, let them use it when it's needed. And this is another device that state law allows students to carry if that's indicated on their asthma action plan, or it could be kept in the office. It could be kept with the teacher. It can be kept wherever the parent and the provider in the school determine is the best place for that student to have their medication. They may need it, especially before PE or recess. A lot of students have activity-induced asthma, so whenever they're going to go out to play, it might be good. So all that would be indicated on their asthma action plan. We also had another law passed a couple of years ago that allowed schools to carry stock albuterol For those students who had a known asthma allergy, has a current asthma action plan on file, but maybe left their inhaler at home, or their inhaler just ran out and they hadn't brought a new one to the school. The stock inhaler is optional for schools, where on the previous slide we talked about stock epinephrine. Stock epinephrine is mandatory in all schools in the state, public and private. The albuterol is optional. Here is our general guidelines for seizures, our seizure emergency action plan. Similarly, you'll see symptoms on the left and what you would do, your actions on the right. We have the varying degrees of seizures. Some are hardly noticeable, some are convulsive, so they're pretty obvious. There's also a law that was passed that allowed for a seizure rescue medication, but there's another form that would need to be in place for that. That would be the seizure medication management order, or the SMMO. And then there's a lot more training that needs to go on when that medication is delegated to lay staff. We had a law passed this last year in 2022 on staff training for recognizing signs and symptoms and seizure first aid for epilepsy or seizures. These are the vetted trainings that Kendra and I have vetted. The Epilepsy Foundation has a couple of trainings. There's the links there. The Epilepsy Alliance has one that's about a half-hour long. And then if your school or district is contracted with Vector, they also have an approved training on seizure recognition. Moving on from chronic illnesses, let's talk about vision screening. That was a law passed in 2019, where it is now mandatory for all students in grades preschool. Oh, I skipped kindergarten, it's not listed there. Preschool, kindergarten, 1st, 3rd, and 5th grades, 7th or 8th, and 9th or 10th grades must annually have their vision screened. There are ways a parent can opt out, and there's also a provision where students who are in 10th grade, if they are enrolled in a driver training class, they get their vision screened with the DMV, and so you can exclude those from the mandatory ones that you screen. We also, if a student fails to achieve benchmark, we have a little bit more comprehensive vision screening that could be done. The teacher, classroom teacher, needs to fill out the vision symptoms questionnaire and give it to the school nurse, and the school nurse will evaluate that document and determine what, if any, further vision screening needs to be done on that school. Excuse me, on that student. Vision screening is also required for students who are being evaluated or reevaluated for special education classification of specific learning disability. Or if parents or teachers have any concern that they might be having a trouble with their vision, they can request a further vision screening evaluation at any time by completing the vision symptoms questionnaire and giving it to the school nurse.
So immunizations are required by law. Certain vaccine preventable diseases that protect all students. And these immunizations are required before they can begin attending a school. There are exemptions that are available for personal or medical reasons, where students, if they have that exemption on file, will not need to be immunized. Students may attend conditionally, which means that if they've started on their series of shots and they are up to date as much as they can be until the next dose is due, then that's called conditional enrollment. And they can attend until that next dose is due, and then they'll have to receive that dose in order to be in compliance and attend school. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the head injury law and rule. And this is a requirement. It initially started with the Protection of Athletes with Head Injury Act through the Utah State Legislature. And this law was mainly focused on athletes and PE students. However, we found that that a lot of head injuries actually occur during the school day. We found that 76% of all brain injuries occur while the student's at school. In 2018, the CDC found that concussions account for 70 to 90% of all emergency room visits in children. So this is a real concern, considering that, you know, sometimes a student can be injured in the head, and that injury can progress to be something else. So in 2021, we passed a board rule called Athletes and Students with Head Injuries. This rule is based off the Protection of Athletes with Head Injury Act, but it is also further restrictive, and it requires schools to adopt and enforce a head injury policy for students that are in physical education and also the extracurricular sporting events. It includes it changed the definition of head injury to include any kind of head bump or mild bump. Anything that a teacher sees or the staff sees should be reported to the parents. So that also occurs during free play. So if a student's at recess, or if it's between classes, or if it's in class and a student hits their head, if a teacher sees it, and then they have to send them to the office for monitoring for about 30 minutes is what we recommend. So if this occurs at school, if a teacher sees it, another student sees it, or the student reports it, then it's important that the LEA contact and notify the parent. If a student is on during school activities, has a head injury, it's also the same. So on a field trip, during or before school, and even on the school bus, if they're on their way to school, it should also be reported. So to further guide LEAs and schools regarding this, the Utah State Board of Education, along with many stakeholders around the state, created a model concussion and head injury policy. And that includes all of the new law and the rule, all the important requirements. It also includes a area for return to learn. And then we have a head injury flow chart for schools to use so that they can follow a simple algorithm. And then also the parent notification forms were created. Again, if the school decides to use their own forms, that's fine. But these are guidelines and recommendations on our state forms. So we also have a health and safety rule, which is R 392-200-9. This requires a clinic room with hand washing sink and a hot and cold water, also soap and individual towels. It also requires that at least 2 individuals on site have a current first aid and CPR certification. One other thing to note is there's also on R 392-200-7, it requires full access to restrooms during the school day. Students cannot be denied access if they have to use the restroom. And if a restroom is locked, there needs to be other accessible restrooms where that students can use or be directed to. So period products in schools passed during the 2022 legislative session from House Bill 162. And this requires that all public schools, so district and charter, to provide free period products in every female or unisex restroom. This requirement includes elementary, middle, and junior high, and high school. It also requires restrooms for school activities that are sanctioned by the school. We further clarified the law in R 277-931. It excludes restrooms that are exclusively used by students in kindergarten or younger that use those restrooms. Those period products are not required for those students. So we also passed a seizure awareness law. We didn't pass it, sorry, it's 53G-9-212. It did pass this year though, and it requires for the 2022-2023, this school year, requires all teachers and administrators of students with epilepsy or seizure disorder to undergo specific training on the different seizure signs and symptoms, and also first aid during a seizure. Next year, during the 2023-2024 school year, the law requires that all staff who interact with students with epilepsy or seizure disorders to undergo the training on the different signs and symptoms and also first aid. And so this includes all staff that has any contact with a student. So it could be the custodian, it could be the lunchroom workers. It's basically everyone that interacts with those students. And this retraining is required every 2 years. So Betty Sue mentioned these in a few slides back with the documents that are required. The Epilepsy Foundation has 2 different trainings. One's 30 minutes, one's 75. The Epilepsy Alliance of America is a 25-minute training, and then Vector, if the schools are contracted with Vector, they can use that training. And those have all been vetted by the Utah State Board of Education and the Utah Health and Human Services.
So we have developed some model policies, not just Kendra and I, but they've been groups of stakeholders. So we have a model wellness policy, and this is housed at the USBE website. And there is the link for that. And that's pretty comprehensive. It goes over things like the child nutrition plan. It goes over physical activity and nutrition and activity. It does have some on health promotion. It does have information on mental health. It's quite comprehensive. Again, this is a model policy, and the best of times, we would like to see all schools implement all parts of it, but it is something that you can look at and determine which might be appropriate for your school. The model head injury policy Kendra just referred to, again, it's in the perfect world, we would like all schools to follow it, but it's a model policy, so you can determine which areas you think are appropriate to implement in your school. The vision screening policy, though, is not a model policy. This is a state policy that is required because it was mandated by statute. So you can find that policy at the link right there. And it talks about what I mentioned previously about the grades where it's mandatory. And then it talks about the vision symptoms questionnaire and when it would be appropriate to use that, and goes into more detail on the tier 1 screening, vision screening, which is the mass distance screening that the mandated grades need to go through. And then it also talks about the tier 2 vision screening, which is the more specialized training that might be indicated after the vision symptoms questionnaire is completed and submitted to the school nurse. I keep links and documents and all kinds of stuff on my website. And at the end, after we finish, actually, we're almost there. When we get to the end of our presentation, I'm going to bring up this website and just kind of walk people through it. But everything that I have created or had any part in creating that might be important for school staff to know, I have listed in my website. This is to one specific page. This link goes to the training page. I have 4 different pages that I'll show you when we finish the presentation. We also have maturation that the school nurses often coordinate in the schools. This is required by the health standards to be taught in 5th grade. Some schools like to also teach it in 4th grade or 6th grade, but at a minimum, it must be taught in at least 5th grade. So it could be 4th and 5th, it could be 4th, 5th, and 6th, it could be 5th and 6th, or it can be just 5th. This does require parental consent per statute. The content is listed in the health standards, as I mentioned, and that's the reference to it there. Typically, it's taught by a school nurse, but not always. And parents should be invited, but are not required to attend. HIPAA and FERPA questions always come up. Most schools are not HIPAA covered entities, but instead are covered by FERPA, which essentially means only those school employees who have a need to know should know. So not everybody in the school needs to know that so-and-so has asthma or so-and-so has diabetes. But if they're in their class, then they absolutely need to know that. Now, the difficulty we have in schools is where HIPAA comes in is if we need to get information from a healthcare provider. There is a section in the HIPAA law that does allow a healthcare provider to disclose the health information about a student to a nurse or physician, but it doesn't mean that they will. Providers have their own rules that they follow. They may be very open to sharing with the schools because the school nurse is an ongoing care provider, or others may not be as willing to do that. It can get pretty complicated. And this is our contact information. If you need to get hold of either of us, our email addresses are there. But what I want to do now is walk you through the HEAL website. So I'm going to share again. And hopefully you can see this. So the HEAL website is where most of my, where all my information is stored. It's Healthy Environments Healthy Environments Active Living is the where the acronym HEAL comes from. So when you go to their loading page, you would click on schools here. And then you would go into the school nursing side of it. Even for schools without a school nurse, this is where everything's going to be found. This first page has just information on school nurses, and the links at the bottom are the ones that I want to show you. So the first one will take you to all the laws we've gone over, any other laws that might be pertinent to the school you can find there, and those are hot links, so you should be able to get directly to them. I'm going to skip around a little bit because there are some pages that have more information than others. This is our data and resources page. So this just goes over a few more things. We do collect an annual workload report. There's the template for that. I do an annual report based off of the school workload report that the nurses submit. I create a survey report, and you can find those for the past several years. And then there's some other resources that are available that you can scroll down to. The training page is the one I specifically called out a little bit earlier. We've got a section on training for school nurses. So there's an orientation course that a new school nurse can go through. And it does not have to be done in any particular order, and it is not limited to just new school nurses. So even the seasoned school nurse who might need a little bit of an update can go in there and look at the specific module that they might need a little bit more information on. There's links to some webinars we've done in the past. All school nurses are required by a statute, and we didn't mention this earlier, but they are required to have mental health training, and here's the link to that training there. And then the lower section is training for school staff. So these will link to outside websites where you can get a little bit more training. There's some more on anaphylaxis, epinephrine, asthma, diabetes. Here's those links for the seizure training again there that you can find. Seizure rescue medication, which we briefly mentioned, can be found there too. And then the last page I wanted to show you is the documents page. This is where almost everything that you need on a daily basis can be found. So here's our healthcare plans for, well, it's divided into chronic conditions. So allergy and anaphylaxis. We have some guidelines written. We've got, this is where you can download the emergency action plan. The most current version will be kept there. So you can see the whole thing and that's what the parent and the provider needs to sign annually and return to the school. There's some training videos on how to administer. The first one is specific to the epinephrine or EpiPen. This also will take you to an EpiPen for Schools is a program where this company, Mylan, will provide up to 4 free EpiPens for each school. You have to have a prescription. You have to submit that prescription to them, but that's a really great resource to have right there. AubiQ is another epinephrine auto injector. It's kind of a cool one. It's shaped a little bit differently, and it gives verbal cues on what you should do. So there's some other training resources. Then we go down to asthma. There's our asthma action plan. Stock albuterol template training. There's training for the stock albuterol program. Here for diabetes, you can see the diabetes IHP and the diabetes emergency action plan. And because diabetes is a little bit complicated, we have an addendum for those that have a continuous glucose monitoring device, a pump, insulin pump, and those students who are on insulin. The instructions are just different on how they receive their medication, and so we have addendums for those. The DMMO is the diabetes medication management order, and that's the form that needs to be signed by the provider. That tells us how much insulin to give and when to give it. And there's some links to some training on that. Then we go down to seizure, same thing, your seizure action plan is available there. There's the sample seizure log. It's important that when a student has seizures that you log those seizures, and that's just a template that you can use. There's the link to the seizure medication management order that would be required for an emergency rescue medication for seizures. And then these are just training materials mostly for the rescue medication training. There's our section on head injuries. And so there's our model policy for head injuries. There's the forms that we created, both in English and in Spanish, the head injury checklist, the flow chart, and then the parent notification. And then we did a webinar. There's a link to a webinar that we did, one in 2021 and one in 2019. General medication, there's our medication authorization form right there. There's a medication log. Again, you should always log all the medications that you give. And we know that errors sometimes happen, so there's a sample error form on that. Here's our vision screening section. So here's where you can find your vision symptoms questionnaire, your referral form if a student doesn't pass the vision screening. There's a certificate for school entry. This is technically required to enter all school by law, but there is a provision because most students do not do that. So if they don't provide the vision certificate, then in the law it states they need to have a vision screening done that school year, and that's what most schools opt for. There's a sample opt-out form. Remember, we have to give parents a way to opt out of the vision screening. All schools need to report to me annually their vision screening, how many they did and how many got glasses and those kinds of things. And then there's some trainings that we developed, some videos on our webinars on how to, one for school nurses on how to set up a vision screening, and one for schools without a nurse on how to set up a vision screening. Then there are 4 Canvas courses that are set up that help you with a little bit more information on vision screening. This first one would be just the basics on how to set one up. Module B would be for training any volunteers that are going to come and help with the vision screening. Need to do module B or be trained by the school nurse. And then only school nurses would need to worry about C, and most of you will never need to worry about D. That's for an approved outside entity like anybody that comes in and wants to help, like the Lions Club will sometimes want to come in and help. They're required to do to submit an application. And then we have some miscellaneous forms. We have a generic healthcare plan. There's a school nurse resource manual for school nurses to kind of give you a hard copy of some things to do. The school spinal screening, which is also called scoliosis. We don't really do that anymore, and this just kind of goes into more details on that. And then some standards of care that have been written on these topics. And that is about it. So if we're going to have another date set up where we will come back and have questions. That information will be sent out along with the link to this webinar. So we hope to see you back when that's announced. We haven't set the date yet, but we will have that date sent out and be here to live to answer any questions you may have. And thank you for joining us today.